one of the most effective things that we can actually do is change the framing of how people think about the internet. And we started out this morning with this discussion of these networks and the notion that there are networks that work by different rules than traditional hierarchical businesses. The next step in that seems to me to be to create some narrative that quantifies the value of that for society. And I've been thinking a bunch about sort of the hidden economies of the internet. And that ranges from traditional economies that are financial economies, but that really aren't that well known, for example, by policymakers. So they don't really know, what is the size of the YouTube economy, for example, when you're talking about piracy, and you say, well, Hollywood's saying, here's this copyright economy, and there's this sort of uncopyrighted content economy, which also has size, but we're not really comparing apples and oranges and growth rates. And this was one piece of it that is simply different business models, and one is invisible. But there's also another aspect that I think we've touched on in a couple of the conversations, like right after lunch when we talked about different companies that have been focused on different values. And I think that we should flesh out that narrative that has run like a thread through today and start to put some horsepower onto quantifying it. And I think one piece that I've been fascinated by, it came back to mind an article I read a frighteningly long time ago in 1975 called The Clothesline Paradox. And it was about solar energy and the notion that we put our clothes in the dryer, and collectively that adds up to some amount of energy that we measure on our utility bills, and collectively as society adds up to our fossil fuel economy. We take our clothes out and hang them on the line. They don't get moved to some kind of solar ledger. They just disappear. We don't measure them at all. And it seems to me there's a lot of economic value on the internet that is like that clothesline paradox. So if you look at somebody pays $60 to the cable company and watches cable TV, everybody recognizes a content transaction. Somebody pays $60 to the same cable company, and all they do is watch YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. It's seen as them getting content for free. And well, somehow that chain of economics was interrupted because people went off into this world where the value exchanges aren't really considered. The value exchange of YouTube is I'm giving you free hosting and the possibility of gathering an audience in exchange for you creating content, and people watching, are sort of sharing. It's definitely one of these networks we're talking about. Eventually, there's an economic layer that gets put on top of it, but there's this huge layer of value creation that is not reflected in the dollar economics. And I would love to sort of start thinking about alternate metrics for that as an economy. If you think about the amount of entertainment hours, for example, that people are getting out of these networks, and you say, well, yeah, they're not monetized yet, but we can start to measure them.
Does anybody know if there are economists doing work on that?
I am trying to find that out. Eric Brynjolfsson at MIT says he's doing something, but I haven't actually read what he's done. So,
is this the same thing as consumer surplus?
In some ways. I mean, it's not entirely the same because I do think that there is a whole consumer surplus argument here as well. For example, but what it has to do with is that there's kind of a pre-monetary barter exchange that goes on in a lot of segments. Where we're clearly exchanging value, and I just think that if we could develop that narrative, it would really help policymakers to think more clearly about the internet.
So a couple of studies come to mind. Eric von Hippel at MIT is doing various studies of user innovation, some of which is internet-driven, some of which is outside, and trying to capture those things that don't show up in traditional measures of company-driven innovation. Then there's I think it's Consumer Electronics Association has done studies of the fair use economy, which are sort of half facetious comparisons to the copyright industry's studies of the piracy economy, but trying to use their measurements to gather data. I think it's a great project, and we should have more of them and more different metrics, because
I wanted to work on one project with the hosting company Bluehost. Some of these ideas came out of the conversation with them. They were saying they wanted to give something back to the open source community because they felt like they'd gotten so much value from them. And in the course of the conversation, Hari Ravichandran, I forget his last name, said, there was some McKinsey study that said, companies, small businesses that have a website get such and such uptick in their sales, and the value that was created by a hosting company is largely derived from free software. So, you had Tim Berners-Lee, who didn't capture the value. You had Monty Wydenius, who didn't capture the value. Linus Torvalds, who didn't capture the value, but they clearly created it. And then you had a chain of intermediaries like hosting companies that did realize some of the value, but a huge part of the value is actually realized in the broader economy by the increased visibility of goods and services. And I do think that, so we're actually going to try to quantify that in the same way that Hal Varian did the economic impact of Google advertising. We're going to work with these guys and try to do a white paper to sort of look at their customer base and sort of say, well, this is what we think about the economic impact. But I think we could do a lot more like that to bring out this narrative of the overall growth of the commons and the value of the commons to society that's been enabled by these new networks. And again, I'd love to get some economists working on how that value creation eventually spills over into sort of the more formal financial economy.
Well, it certainly does. I mean, there's companies that have scrapped out their exchange servers that they were paying, tens of thousands of dollars a year to operate, and just have moved to Google Mail and either spend nothing or spend a trivial amount of money, and that money then allows them to hire another person or two in their company, and I think the internet is just full of those stories. I mean, that may be the story of the internet.
Or not hire. The other thing is, and I think I couldn't agree more, Tim, with what you're saying. I absolutely agree. But the internet doesn't just create growth; it also creates efficiency to an extreme. Craig's List classifieds, and as Craig said at one point to me, I'm talking around Craig even though he's not here, the theme of the day. But Craig was in essence a philanthropist of classified ads. Right, he left the money in the pockets of the transactors rather than the pockets of the middlemen.
Yeah, but that money doesn't stay in the pockets, though. It just gets spent somewhere else.
Right, but I'm saying it's a difficult accounting because we're going to have some people say, and I'm agreeing completely, but I'm just anticipating the argument is, yeah, your damn internet destroyed, retail destroyed, newspapers destroyed, this destroyed that. So you've got to have an ability. It didn't destroy anything.
It just reallocated wealth to other places.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying that's the way in the narrative you've got to make. You've got to make that case.
It's definitely destroying the newspaper.
But it's increasing journalism in other ways.
It's not just making it more efficient. It didn't destroy anything. It just caused different forms of business to get created that replaced what that business was, and
they're sometimes
and
smaller.
The capitalists who owned those industries lost wealth, and the wealth got transferred to other places. It didn't just evaporate.
Amen, brother. I'm agreeing with you, but I'm saying this is the argument you're going to hear back. So the narrative is the right word. There's a narrative here that says that it creates value and efficiency in other ways.
So this is a challenge of the internet and of this whole problem, because in every one of these cases, the loss that you're experiencing is concentrated, right? And it's represented by an industry lobby, whether it's Hollywood or the newspapers or whoever, and the benefit is diffuse and hard to quantify. And so on the one hand, you could look at that as like an enormous challenge. On the other hand, you could look at that as maybe a new kind of opportunity. We've been thinking a lot about what are the ways that the web can advocate for itself that play on its own strengths. And one of the things that the web is good at is having lots of people tell lots of stories in different places. And so I like the idea of sparking a meme, a storytelling meme that gets at where is the value in all of these networks.
Well, that brings up something that I've heard in Washington is that besides money, one other thing that speaks are constituent stories. That if you can actually get a story from a constituent that can have a real impact. And so, to me, stories about, hey, such and such good happened to me because of the internet.
Right. And there's got to be somebody who's made money on Etsy in every congressional district.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Etsy's a pretty
So,
good,
just an Etsy,
substantial business
I
at
made
this
money,
point.
I'm a small business, and you're, go into every congressperson, right?
Well, you wouldn't just do Etsy. I think what you'd
But-
want to do is you'd want to
Sure,
do
broader.
Airbnb and Uber
Absolutely.
and Etsy and Kickstarter and all
Right,
those.
right, right. No, the
all
whole
those
Not to
kinds of
mention
things.
eBay.
What?
I mean, they go back to the
eBay, absolutely.
Right.
eBay
And
and
not just
Craigslist.
companies, right? So like your blog community donates X dollars a year to Donors Choose, right? And that's like a form of value creation in an internet community. And I don't think we should just limit it to companies. We should think about the wealth that's being created by all of these networks.
Jamie is trying to get a word in.
There's something in that.
I just feel like
It's on the politics of the
maybe you write a paper and
the emergency
get
network.
someone like CAP to put it out, or co-brand it, so that it kind of flows into the regular channels. You go, look at the size of all of these these hidden economies. I'm actually toying with the idea of launching a conference called Hidden Economies that would kind of try to focus on how they work, what the stories are, who's succeeding. You could have
You just
both
can't find the
practical.
conference.
What?
You can't find the conference because it's hidden.
There is that, yes.
So we're actually, I think Nick's point is a really central point here, and that is that there is no lobby for, in Tim's example, the solar energy that's drying the clothes on the line, and there is a lobby for the electricity industry that is providing the power. And so, there's this very easily measured, concentrated harm, whether it's the newspaper industry or the electricity industry, and there's a very diffuse benefit and we need to figure out a way to aggregate those conversations, those diffuse conversations. I like coming back to the environmental movement here and the environment as a model, because it's there's also this notion of natural capitalism, which is actually valuing the services that are oxygen, sunlight, warmth, things like that are provided. And if you had to but we don't value those.
And that actually does lead into it might be, I think looking at the environmental movement teaches us some useful things, and one of the good things it teaches us is that almost all of the ideas that people have suggested here had a valuable role to play in the environmental movement. One thing the environmental movement did brilliantly was mobilize anecdotes. So that there will be a silent spring because all the birds will be dead, right? That's a great anecdote, right? Actually turned out the science was crap, like DDT actually wasn't thinning the bird shells, and probably crap in a way that led to significant harm to people who otherwise wouldn't have got malaria. But as an anecdote, it was amazing.